It was a warm autumn afternoon in 1985 when the residents of a quiet neighborhood in rural Mississippi noticed something strange. The house at the end of Willow Creek Lane, home to the Johnson family, stood silent. The familiar laughter of the children, the sounds of music drifting from the windows, the scent of home-cooked meals, all of it had vanished overnight. People had grown used to seeing Harold and Evelyn Johnson tending to their garden or watching their 3 children ride their bikes down the lane. But that day, no one came out of the house. The curtains stayed drawn, the mailbox overflowed, and the once lively home felt empty, as if the family had simply disappeared into thin air. Harold Johnson was a hard-working man, respected in town for his dedication to his job at the local mill. Evelyn, known for her kindness, often volunteered at the church and helped neighbors in need. Their children, Anthony, just 12, sweet and curious, Monica, 10, bright and full of energy, and little Sam, only 6, were the heart of the community. That's why their sudden disappearance sent a ripple of shock and confusion through the small town. People gathered in groups, whispering theories and sharing concerns. Where could they have gone? Why hadn't they said goodbye? What could make an entire family abandon their home without a trace? Local authorities were called in quickly. Sheriff Cole, a man who had served the town for over 20 years, led the investigation. He and his team searched the house from top to bottom. The Johnsons' belongings were all there, clothes neatly hung in closets, dishes in the sink, toys scattered in the children's rooms. There were no signs of struggle, no broken windows, no forced doors. The family car was still parked in the driveway, keys resting on the kitchen counter. To the sheriff, it was as if the Johnsons had been spirited away, leaving behind everything they owned. The town held its breath as days turned into weeks, and then months, without any word or clue. Speculation grew. Some believed the family had left to escape troubles no one knew about. Others whispered of foul play, though no evidence supported that idea. Rumors spread of debts, secret enemies, or connections to people from out of town who might have wished them harm. But with no bodies, no messages, and no evidence of violence, all anyone had were questions. The Johnsons' disappearance became a mystery that haunted the community, a reminder of how quickly the ordinary could turn into the unexplainable. Their empty house stood as a chilling symbol of what had been lost, visited only by overgrown vines and the occasional curious passerby. 9 long years passed. The house on Willow Creek Lane became part of local legend. Teenagers dared each other to approach it at night. Newcomers were told stories of the vanished family. But for the people who had known the Johnsons, there was no comfort in those tales, only sadness and unresolved grief. Some still left flowers at the gate. Evelyn's sister, Martha, visited the property every year on the anniversary of their disappearance, hoping for some kind of sign. But there was never anything. The house remained still and silent, a place frozen in time. Then, in the spring of 1994, something changed. The property had been sold to a developer who planned to tear down the old house and build modern homes. As workers began clearing the land, one of them discovered something odd behind a wall in the basement. It was subtle at first, a hollow sound when tapping the bricks, a small crack that didn't match the rest of the foundation. Driven by curiosity, they started carefully removing parts of the wall. What they uncovered shocked them to their core. A hidden room, sealed off for who knew how long, with no door leading in or out. And inside that dark, narrow space were the Johnsons, alive. Weak, frightened, and barely able to stand, Harold, Evelyn, and their children were found huddled together, their eyes wide with disbelief as sunlight poured in for the first time in almost a decade. The workers immediately called the authorities, and soon the property was swarming with police, medics, and reporters desperate to learn what had happened. The Johnsons were rushed to the hospital, where doctors treated them for malnutrition and dehydration. But the most haunting question remained. How did they end up trapped in that secret room, hidden just beneath their own home, for 9 long years without anyone knowing? The discovery sent shockwaves through the town and beyond. News crews arrived from across the state, eager to share the incredible and heartbreaking story. Reporters crowded outside the hospital, hoping for a glimpse of the family or a statement that might explain the unimaginable. Inside, the Johnsons remained too weak to speak, their minds clouded with memories they weren't ready to share. But as investigators began digging deeper, strange details surfaced. Who had built the secret room? Why had no one noticed anything unusual during the initial search all those years ago? And perhaps most unsettling of all, had someone done this to them on purpose? Neighbors began to recall odd moments from the past, things they had dismissed at the time. One person remembered hearing faint knocking late at night years ago, but had assumed it was their imagination. Another spoke of seeing a shadowy figure near the house shortly after the family disappeared, but fear of stirring up trouble kept them silent. Piece by piece, these scattered memories hinted at a dark truth that had hidden in plain sight all along. It seemed clear now that the Johnsons hadn't left on their own. They had been taken, trapped within the very walls meant to protect them, while life continued above and around them. The town that once grieved the Johnsons' loss now reeled with a new horror. The realization that for nearly a decade, help had been so close, yet so far out of reach. Families locked their doors a little tighter. Children were kept closer to home. And the once quiet neighborhood became a place where the past and present blurred in painful ways. But as the Johnsons slowly recovered, one question lingered louder than all the others. Who was responsible for their nightmare? And would they ever truly be brought to justice? As more evidence came to light, and the Johnsons began to regain their strength, what they revealed would shake the community to its core. But that part of the story, that's where things truly take a chilling turn. In the days that followed the shocking discovery of the Johnson family, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. People who had long given up hope now found themselves glued to their radios and televisions, waiting for any update. The sight of Harold and Evelyn, pale and fragile, being carried out of the hidden room was burned into everyone's mind. Their children, no longer small but thin and ghost-like from years of darkness, barely spoke. It was a miracle they were alive at all, but the questions surrounding their ordeal only deepened the mystery. How had they survived in that cramped, hidden space for so long? And why had no one heard their cries or found them sooner? The house on Willow Creek Lane, once just an old, empty building, became the focus of a massive investigation. Crime scene tapes surrounded the property, and officers combed through every inch of the structure, determined not to miss a single clue this time. What they found was baffling. The hidden room was expertly sealed. Layers of brick and drywall concealed it so well that even experienced builders said it was nearly invisible. There were no windows, no vents, no way in or out except through the opening the workers had accidentally uncovered. The air had been stale and thin. The only light had come from a small, makeshift bulb wired to the house's power, though it barely worked by the time they were found. As the Johnsons began to regain some strength, detectives and doctors tried to piece together their story gently, knowing the trauma they had endured was beyond what most could imagine. Harold, his voice shaky and hoarse, spoke first in whispers. He described a night of terror that felt like it had happened just yesterday. Someone had entered their home. He didn't know who, they never saw a face. He remembered being forced into the basement at gunpoint, though the details blurred. There had been fear, confusion, and then complete darkness as the walls closed in around them. Evelyn's memories were just as fragmented. She recalled comforting her children as the walls seemed to swallow them. She spoke of time passing in strange ways, of trying to keep the kids calm, of praying for rescue that never came. The children, older now but emotionally frozen in time, clung to their parents, unwilling or unable to speak of what they'd endured. Anthony, once a bright and curious boy, stared blankly ahead. Monica kept her head down, rarely making eye contact. And little Sam, now no longer so little, refused to leave his mother's side even for a moment. The investigators, led by Sheriff Cole who had once searched for them in vain, felt the weight of their failure. How could they have missed this room? How had whoever built it managed to hide it so well? And, most chillingly, had someone been watching the house all these years, knowing the family was trapped inside? The sheriff couldn't shake the feeling that the answer lay close to home. The level of planning and secrecy it took to create such a space meant it wasn't the work of a stranger passing through. Someone with knowledge of the house, maybe even someone the Johnsons had trusted, had to be responsible. The town's older residents began sharing what they remembered. Some spoke of a contractor who'd worked on the house years before the Johnsons moved in, a man who'd left town suddenly, his name barely remembered. Others recalled a neighbor who'd been friendly with Harold, but moved away not long after the family disappeared. These fragments of information were small pieces of a much larger puzzle, but they gave investigators somewhere to start. Files were reopened, old interviews reread, and new leads pursued. The case that had gone cold for nearly a decade was now burning with fresh urgency. As the Johnsons stayed under protective care at the hospital, more strange details emerged. The hidden room had contained some basic supplies, canned food, water, blankets. But they hadn't lasted long. The family had survived by rationing and enduring hunger that no one should have to face. Sometimes they heard footsteps above. Sometimes they heard voices, laughter even, as life went on in the world that had forgotten them. They banged on the walls at first, called for help until their voices gave out. But as the years dragged on, hope faded. The isolation became their reality, a silent nightmare that seemed endless. Reporters continued to flood the town, eager to get any scrap of information. The media dubbed it the Willow Creek Mystery, and people everywhere speculated about who could have done something so cruel. Television specials and newspaper columns offered theories. Some believed it was the work of a disturbed loner. Others thought there was more to the story, perhaps a long-buried feud or secret the family had tried to keep hidden. But no one could explain how they'd remained so close to rescue, yet completely unseen for so long. The hidden room became a symbol of horror, a reminder of how evil can sometimes hide in plain sight. Sheriff Cole worked around the clock, retracing every step of the original investigation. He spoke with former deputies, checked records of workers who had been on the property, and called in help from state authorities. Every brick of that house seemed to whisper a secret, but getting to the truth was proving harder than anyone imagined. The Johnson story was incomplete, their memories fragmented by fear and time. And the person, or people, responsible had left no clear trail. The sheriff knew the longer it took to uncover the truth, the harder it would be to bring the guilty to justice. Meanwhile, the Johnson family tried to adjust to freedom. The world had changed in 9 years. Anthony and Monica struggled with the idea of school, of friends, of stepping back into lives they barely remembered. Sam, who had gone into that room as a small child, now faced a world he didn't understand. Evelyn and Harold, though grateful to be free, carried the weight of guilt and sorrow. They had done everything they could to protect their children, but the scars of those years in darkness ran deep. The community offered support, but even kind words and good intentions couldn't erase the pain. And through it all, one question haunted everyone. Was the person who'd done this still out there, watching, waiting? The thought chilled the town to its core. Locks were checked and rechecked. Parents kept their children close. The Johnsons' home, now a crime scene, stood as a grim reminder that evil can strike even in the safest of places. But the answers the town so desperately sought remained just out of reach, hidden like the secret room itself, waiting to be uncovered. As the investigation pushed forward, as memories were pieced together and new evidence slowly came to light, the sense of unease only grew. Because the truth about what had happened to the Johnson family wasn't just about a hidden room or years stolen in the dark. It was about something far more terrifying, how easily the ordinary can mask the unimaginable. And soon, that truth would begin to reveal itself in ways no one in Willow Creek could have ever expected. The days turned into weeks, and the mystery of the Johnson family's disappearance and their unbelievable return continued to grip the town. The more investigators dug, the more tangled the truth seemed to become. Each new clue led to more questions, and with every passing day, the weight of uncertainty pressed heavier on everyone. People who had once felt safe in Willow Creek now looked over their shoulders, locking their doors earlier each night. The idea that someone among them could have built that secret room and kept a family hidden for 9 years was too much to bear. And yet, no one could deny that the danger had once been so close, hidden behind walls no one had thought to question. Sheriff Cole, driven by guilt and determination, divided his time between comforting the Johnson family and tracking down any thread that might unravel the mystery. He spent long nights at the station, poring over dusty records, searching for names that might have slipped through the cracks. He revisited everyone who had ever worked on the house, contractors, handymen, electricians, but many had left the area or passed on. What troubled him most was that whoever had done this had known exactly what they were doing. The hidden room had been built with skill, as if by someone who understood how to make things disappear. Someone who knew how to make people disappear. Meanwhile, Harold and Evelyn struggled to rebuild their lives. The hospital released them into a safe house provided by the state, far from Willow Creek, where they could try to heal in peace. But peace was hard to find. Harold found himself waking in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced he heard footsteps or voices from behind the walls. Evelyn barely slept at all, listening for sounds that weren't there, afraid that somehow it could happen again. The children, too, bore deep scars. Anthony, now a teenager, rarely spoke. He avoided windows, stayed in corners, and jumped at loud noises. Monica, once so full of life, seemed to have forgotten how to smile. Sam clung to his mother so tightly that she could barely move without him. Freedom was what they had longed for, but freedom brought its own kind of terror. Back in Willow Creek, people began to whisper about the old neighbor, Mr. Dwyer. He had been friendly with Harold back in the day, always offering to help fix things around the house. After the Johnsons vanished, Dwyer sold his home and left town suddenly, saying he wanted a fresh start elsewhere. No one had thought much of it at the time, but now, with fresh eyes, his disappearance seemed suspicious. Sheriff Cole sent officers to track him down, hoping he might know something, anything, that could explain what had happened. But Dwyer was nowhere to be found. The trail went cold in another state, and no one could say for sure where he had gone. As the investigation stretched on, another layer of the story began to surface. Reporters uncovered that years before the Johnsons moved in, the house on Willow Creek Lane had belonged to a man named Lester Grady. Grady had been a recluse, rarely seen by neighbors, and his sudden death had left the property vacant for some time. Rumors swirled about strange noises from the house when Grady lived there, hammering at odd hours, deliveries made late at night. Could Grady have built the hidden room for some dark purpose of his own? And if so, had someone else discovered it later and used it to trap the Johnsons? Sheriff Cole's team searched through property records and building permits, but nothing pointed directly to Grady or any illegal construction. It was as if the room had been built in complete secrecy. Every angle they explored only added to the confusion. The town's sense of security unraveled further. Parents who once let their children roam freely now walked into school. Neighbors who had trusted each other for years started to wonder who might be hiding secrets. The Johnsons' tragedy became more than a story of survival. It became a shadow that hung over everyone. Amid all this, a local reporter named Carla Jennings took a special interest in the case. She had grown up in Willow Creek, and like many, she remembered the Johnson family before they disappeared. Now working for the county paper, Carla decided to dig deeper than anyone else. She went door to door, interviewing neighbors who had lived near the Johnsons, trying to piece together small details that the police might have missed. People were reluctant at first, tired of questions, wary of outsiders, but Carla's persistence paid off. One elderly woman recalled something odd. Late one night, shortly after the Johnsons disappeared, she had seen a light flicker briefly in the basement window of the house. She had dismissed it as her imagination at the time. Another neighbor admitted hearing muffled cries but convinced himself it was the wind. Carla shared her findings with Sheriff Cole, who felt both frustration and hope. How had these details been overlooked all those years ago? Could it be that the Johnsons had been crying for help the entire time, so close, and no one had dared to listen closely enough? The guilt weighed on everyone. But there was something else that didn't sit right with the sheriff. The hidden room had been stocked with supplies at first, enough for the family to survive in those early months. Someone had planned for them to be there, at least for a while. But then what? Had the person responsible abandoned them? Or had something gone wrong in the plan? As weeks turned into months, the Johnsons' story began to change from a tale of survival to a chilling reminder of how little people really know about the places they call home. The house on Willow Creek Lane, now boarded up and guarded by police, became a magnet for curiosity seekers. Teenagers dared each other to get close. People from other towns drove by slowly, snapping photos of the house where a family had lived in darkness beneath the floorboards. And through it all, the person responsible for that nightmare remained free, their identity hidden as skillfully as the room they had built. Harold, unable to rest, began keeping a journal. He wrote down memories as they came back to him, trying to make sense of what had happened. He remembered small details: the sound of footsteps on the floor above, the smell of cigarette smoke once drifting through a crack in the wall, the faint hum of a radio far away. Could these have been clues? Could he have done something different to save his family sooner? The questions haunted him. Evelyn encouraged him, hoping that writing it down might bring him some peace. But she knew the wounds ran too deep for words alone to heal. The sheriff, too, kept at his work, following every lead no matter how small. He knew the town depended on him to find the truth. But the more he learned, the more he realized that the answer wasn't simple. The hidden room was more than bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of secrets kept, of trust broken, of evil that could exist in places no one wanted to believe it could. And whoever was behind it had planned well, so well that they had slipped away into the world unnoticed while the Johnsons were left behind in the dark. The investigation continued, and new theories surfaced. Some thought it might have been someone from outside town, passing through and choosing the house at random. Others believed it was someone local, someone who had blended in, who might still be there, watching as the town unraveled. The Johnson story wasn't over. In fact, it seemed as if it was only just beginning. Because behind the mystery of the secret room was a deeper question. How well do we ever really know the people around us? And what horrors might still be hidden, waiting to come to light? The search for answers began to take a toll on everyone. Sheriff Cole, who had always been steady and sure, now looked worn, his eyes heavy from sleepless nights. He had chased every lead, called in experts, and leaned on old contacts, but the truth still slipped through his fingers like sand. The Johnson family's nightmare had become his own, a puzzle that refused to come together. And as the town waited, the fear grew heavier. People didn't just want justice, they needed it. They needed to believe that whoever had done this would be caught, that the darkness would lift, and that Willow Creek could finally breathe again. The house on Willow Creek Lane stood silent, guarded night and day, but it felt like it was hiding more than just that terrible room. Investigators kept returning, looking for anything they might have missed. They used ground-penetrating radar, thermal cameras, and every tool at their disposal. They tapped on walls, searched beneath floorboards, and traced the wiring through the house, hoping for some overlooked clue. Every creak of the old would seem to mock them. No one could understand how someone had pulled this off. And the bigger question lingered. Was there still more to find? Carla Jennings, the reporter who had made it her mission to uncover the truth, kept pushing forward. She had begun getting anonymous letters, slipped under her office door or left on her car windshield. The notes were short, written in block letters, warning her to stop digging. One simply said, "Let it rest." Another read, "Some things should stay buried." The notes only fueled her determination. She believed someone in town knew more than they were saying. Someone who had seen or heard something all those years ago but had stayed silent out of fear or guilt. And now, as the truth threatened to break free, that same someone was trying to keep it hidden. Carla started spending her nights parked near the old house, watching from a distance. It was foolish, she knew, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the person responsible was still out there, maybe even returning to the scene, drawn back to what they had done. One night, close to midnight, as fog settled thick over the neighborhood, she saw movement. A figure slipped around the side of the house, careful and quiet. Carla held her breath, heart pounding so loud she was sure it would give her away. She stayed low, watching as the figure disappeared into the shadows. Who was it? Why had they come? She didn't dare follow, but she took down every detail she could: the way the person moved, the size of their frame, even the slight limp that was visible when they stepped into a patch of moonlight. The next morning, Carla went straight to the sheriff. She shared what she'd seen, her voice trembling not just from fear but from the weight of what it might mean. Sheriff Cole listened closely, his jaw tight, and sent officers to search the area. But by then, the figure was long gone. They found fresh footprints in the damp soil, proof that Carla hadn't imagined it. But the tracks led nowhere, fading into the woods behind the house. Whoever it was, they knew how to move unseen. It was as if the person responsible was always one step ahead, watching, waiting, and still determined to keep the truth locked away. Meanwhile, the Johnson family tried to piece together their memories. Harold spent hours speaking with investigators, going over every detail he could remember from that night when their world changed forever. He spoke of the voice of the person who forced them down into the basement, low, steady, and cold. He remembered the smell of sawdust and fresh paint, as if the room had been prepared just before they were shoved inside. Evelyn recalled hearing what she thought was drilling or hammering even after they were sealed in. Could it be that the room wasn't finished until after they were trapped? That someone had worked above them, finishing the prison while they huddled below? Anthony, Monica, and Sam each had their own flashes of memory, shadows moving on the other side of the wall, the distant sound of a radio, the creak of floorboards late at night. But none of it added up to a clear picture. The family's trauma had blurred the edges of their memories, leaving gaps too wide to bridge. And that only made it harder for the sheriff's team to piece the puzzle together. Every clue pointed to someone who had been careful, who had planned this with precision, and who had managed to vanish without a trace once the job was done. The town began to fray at the edges. People who had been friends for decades now eyed each other with suspicion. Could the person who had done this still be living among them? Could it have been someone they trusted? Theories spread like wildfire. Some said it had to be an outsider, someone who passed through and found the perfect house to carry out their plan. Others insisted it was someone local, someone who knew the Johnsons' routines, who had watched and waited for the right moment. Whispers filled the air, and no one felt safe. Sheriff Cole decided to bring in a criminal profiler, hoping for fresh insight. The profiler studied the crime scene photos, the layout of the house, the construction of the hidden room, and the details of the Johnsons' captivity. His conclusions were chilling. This wasn't the work of someone acting on impulse. This was someone with patience, someone who enjoyed control, someone who had likely watched the family for some time before making their move. And perhaps most unsettling of all, someone who might not be finished. The profiler warned that people who go to such lengths to hide others away don't usually stop with just one crime. There could be other victims, other secrets, still hidden somewhere. That possibility haunted Sheriff Cole as he dug deeper. He reopened old missing person cases, searching for patterns, looking for connections that had been overlooked. He began to see strange similarities, people who had disappeared from neighboring towns, cases where there had been no signs of struggle, no evidence of where they had gone. Could these cases be tied to whoever had built that room? Could they be dealing with someone far more dangerous than they had ever imagined? Tension in Willow Creek reached a breaking point one stormy night when a fire broke out at the Johnson house. Flames lit up the night sky, drawing neighbors and emergency crews to the scene. The house was already half consumed by the time help arrived. It was as if someone had wanted to erase it, to destroy whatever secrets still lingered in its walls. Arson investigators confirmed what many already suspected: the fire had been set intentionally. Whoever had come to the house that night, whoever had slipped into the shadows as Carla watched, had returned to finish the job. But the fire didn't just destroy the house. It reignited the fear, the anger, and the desperate need for answers. Sheriff Cole stood in the rain that night, watching the flames burn, and vowed to himself that this wouldn't be the end. Somewhere out there, the person who had done this was watching. And as the smoke rose into the night, it carried with it the promise that the truth was close, so close that the person responsible was willing to risk everything to keep it buried. The tension had never been higher, the danger never more real. And what came next would finally bring the story to its most terrifying moment. The morning after the fire, Willow Creek felt like a town on edge, as if the smoke that had filled the night air left behind more than just ash. People gathered near the charred remains of the Johnson house, staring in stunned silence at what was left, a blackened skeleton of a building that once held so many secrets. The fire had wiped out whatever evidence might have been hidden in those walls. It was clear to everyone that this wasn't just an accident. Someone wanted the house gone, the memories erased, and whatever truth was buried inside to stay hidden forever. Sheriff Cole stood at the edge of the property, his boots sinking into the damp earth, feeling the weight of failure all over again. Whoever was behind this had not only stolen the Johnsons' years, they were now stealing their chance at closure. But as the ashes cooled, something unexpected surfaced. Fire crews clearing debris uncovered a metal box, charred but intact, that had been hidden beneath a floorboard in the basement, the same basement that once held the secret room. It was locked tight, its edges burned, but the contents inside protected. Sheriff Cole had it taken to the station right away. When the lock was finally pried open, what they found stunned everyone. Inside were old photographs, blueprints of the house, and a stack of handwritten notes. The blueprints showed not just the hidden room but other modifications to the house that no one had known about, crawl spaces, false walls, and sealed-off closets. It seemed the house had been designed with secrecy in mind long before the Johnsons moved in. The notes were even more disturbing. They appeared to be a journal kept by someone who had lived in the house years before. The writing was neat, deliberate, and chilling. The author described watching the Johnson family, learning their routines, and planning how to isolate them without anyone noticing. What stood out most was that the entries started before the Johnsons moved in. The writer spoke of preparing the house, of making sure the trap was ready for the right family. This wasn't about the Johnsons personally. It seemed they had been chosen at random, victims of a plan that had been in motion long before they ever arrived on Willow Creek Lane. Sheriff Cole felt his stomach knot as he read the pages. The level of detail, the patience, the cold calculation, it was more than he'd imagined. The person who had done this hadn't just hidden the Johnsons. They had turned their home into a maze of deception, a place where people could vanish without a trace. And if that person had gone to such lengths once, who's to say they hadn't done it again? The sheriff ordered a full search of town records, looking for other properties linked to the house's former owners, hoping to find any connection that might lead them to the person responsible. As the investigation deepened, another shock came. Carla Jennings, the reporter who had been following the story so closely, received a package at her office. There was no return address. Inside was a small recorder, the kind used for interviews. When she pressed play, a voice filled the room, low, steady, and eerily calm. The speaker spoke directly to her, as if they knew she would be the one to listen. They warned her to stop asking questions, to stop digging into the past. The voice promised that if she continued, more people would suffer. It wasn't a threat made in anger. It was delivered with chilling certainty, as if the speaker had already decided what would happen next. Carla took the recording straight to Sheriff Cole. He had the tape analyzed, hoping for clues in the background noise or some trace that might point to the caller. But the recording was clean, no background sounds, no slips that could reveal the speaker's identity. What terrified both Carla and the sheriff was how the caller knew where to find her and how they had delivered the package without being seen. It was as if the person they were chasing was always one step ahead, watching, waiting, and ready to strike again if necessary. While the town held its breath, something else began to unfold. Families from nearby communities started coming forward, drawn by the media coverage of the Johnson story. They spoke of their own loved ones who had vanished over the years, cases that had gone cold, people who had left no sign of where they'd gone. One family described how their teenage daughter disappeared after visiting a friend in Willow Creek. Another spoke of a traveling salesman who had never returned from a business trip that passed through the area. The sheriff's office suddenly found itself flooded with new leads, new connections, and a terrifying possibility that the Johnsons' ordeal was just part of something much larger, a web of disappearances stretching back years. Among the families was an older woman named Lillian Green, who brought with her a faded photograph. In it stood a man who looked strikingly familiar, tall, lean, with sharp features and a distant gaze. Lillian said it was her brother, Thomas, who had worked as a carpenter and handyman. He had vanished over 15 years ago after taking a job restoring an old house outside Willow Creek. The house, she explained, was known for its odd design and hidden spaces. Sheriff Cole felt a chill as he realized the description matched the Johnson property's history. Could Thomas have been involved somehow? Or had he too fallen victim to the person behind all of this? The second twist left the town reeling. It wasn't just about one house or one family anymore. It was about a pattern, a predator who had been operating in plain sight, possibly for decades. The sheriff's team worked day and night, cross-referencing records, interviewing anyone who had connections to the properties in question. And as they did, they began to see the outlines of something even more terrifying, a network of homes, each modified in similar ways, spread out across several counties. The modifications weren't always obvious, but once you knew what to look for, extra walls, false floors, sealed rooms, they became clear. The stakes had never been higher. Sheriff Cole knew that whoever they were dealing with wasn't just a danger to Willow Creek. This was someone who had mastered the art of vanishing people, of erasing lives and leaving no trace. The community that had once felt small and safe now seemed like the hunting ground of a person whose reach extended far beyond what anyone had feared. And the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. The fire at the Johnson house, the threatening messages, the carefully planned warnings, they were all signs that the person behind this wasn't done. They were still out there, still watching, still capable of striking again. As tension gripped Willow Creek, Harold and Evelyn Johnson tried to hold their family together. They moved from safe house to safe house, never staying in one place too long, always looking over their shoulders. Harold felt the burden of protecting his family, of somehow making up for all the years lost. Evelyn tried to keep hope alive for the children, but even she couldn't hide her fear anymore. The past wasn't done with them. And as the sheriff's team closed in on the truth, the final confrontation felt inevitable, an unseen enemy drawing closer with every passing day, ready to do whatever it took to protect the secrets that had stayed hidden for so long. The town braced for what was coming, not knowing that the darkest chapter of the Johnson family story was still waiting to unfold. The storm that rolled over Willow Creek that night seemed to match the tension in the air. Rain lashed the streets, lightning cracked across the sky, and thunder shook windows as if nature itself was bracing for what was about to unfold. Sheriff Cole stood in his office, staring at the map tacked to the wall, marked with pins showing every house, every strange disappearance, every link they'd uncovered. The pattern was clear now. The houses had all been owned or touched in some way by one man. And that man was Thomas Green, the same Thomas whose sister had begged them to find him, the man everyone thought had vanished 15 years earlier. But Thomas hadn't disappeared. He had been hiding in plain sight, weaving himself into communities, buying or working on homes, and turning them into traps. Carla Jennings burst through the door, soaked from the rain, holding a file of property records she'd just pulled from the county archives. She laid them on Cole's desk, her hands trembling. Thomas Green had recently purchased an old farmhouse on the edge of town under an alias. It had been empty for years, falling apart at the edges, the perfect place for someone like him to set another stage. The sheriff didn't waste a second. He called his team, grabbed his coat, and led a convoy through the storm, sirens cutting through the night as they raced toward the farmhouse. The place was as eerie as they'd feared. Set back from the road, hidden by overgrown trees and wild vines, it loomed in the darkness, windows black and lifeless. The rain fell in sheets, making it hard to see, but they moved in, flashlights sweeping across the property. The door creaked open with a single shove, revealing a house hollowed out, stripped bare except for the structure itself. But as they moved through, they found the signs: fresh sawdust, power tools, a coil of wire, and newly built walls that didn't match the original design. Sheriff Cole felt his heart race. They were close. In the back of the house, behind what looked like an old pantry, they found it, a hidden door, so well-crafted it was nearly invisible. It led down to a basement that smelled of damp earth and fresh wood. The team moved as one, weapons drawn, every sense alert. At the bottom of the stairs, they found what they had feared, another room, sealed tight, soundproofed, designed to hide its prisoners. And inside, they found Thomas Green. He stood calmly, as if he had been expecting them, his face pale but composed, eyes sharp and empty of regret. Around him were tools of his terrible craft, bricks, mortar, wood, locks, all ready for whatever he had planned next. Thomas said nothing at first, even as they cuffed him and led him up the stairs. But as they brought him out into the storm, he turned to Sheriff Cole and spoke in a voice that sent chills down everyone's spine. "You'll never understand why," he said. "You were never meant to." Those words hung heavy as they loaded him into a squad car and drove him back to town. The storm seemed to ease as they left, as if the night itself was letting go of the breath it had been holding. Back at the station, Thomas finally talked. His calm unnerved everyone as he explained how he had planned it all, how he'd chosen houses that could hide his rooms, how he'd watched families, selecting those who seemed the most ordinary because they were the least likely to be suspected of having enemies. He admitted to building the room at the Johnson house, to sealing them away and watching from afar as the town searched in vain. He spoke of control, of power, of the satisfaction he felt knowing they were there, hidden where no one could find them. It was more than anyone had been prepared to hear, and it left the room silent except for the rain still tapping against the windows. Sheriff Cole saw to it that Thomas was charged for every crime they could prove, and more charges were sure to follow as other towns reopened their cold cases. The Johnson family, learning that the man who had stolen their lives was finally caught, felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. No justice could give them back the years they had lost, but at least the person who had caused their suffering could no longer hurt anyone else. Harold and Evelyn held their children close that night, watching the storm clear and the first stars break through the clouds. It felt, for the first time in years, like a weight had lifted. But even as the town began to breathe easier, the story wasn't over. As the days passed, crews returned to the burned remains of the Johnson house to clear the land. Beneath what was once the basement, workers uncovered something that made even the most seasoned among them stop cold, a second hidden room, deeper than the first, untouched by the fire. It had been sealed tighter, with thicker walls, and inside were old belongings, dusty but preserved, toys, clothes, and journals that didn't belong to the Johnsons. Sheriff Cole arrived at the scene and felt his heart sink. These items belonged to a family that had gone missing from a nearby town nearly 20 years earlier, a case that had haunted him since his early days as a deputy. It became clear that the Johnsons had not been the first to suffer in that house. Thomas Green's twisted work had started long before they ever moved in. The final twist left everyone shaken. Even though Thomas was in custody, the discovery raised the terrifying question of whether he had ever worked alone. The second room had been so well hidden that even Thomas, during questioning, had made no mention of it. And there were details in the construction that didn't match his style exactly. Could someone else have been involved? Someone still out there? Someone who had taught Thomas or partnered with him in his crimes? Willow Creek tried to move forward, but the shadow of the mystery lingered. Sheriff Cole knew that answers might never come for all the families affected. But he vowed to keep searching, to follow every lead, and to never let another family fall victim to the horrors hidden behind ordinary walls. The Johnson family, scarred but strong, decided to leave Willow Creek, hoping to start fresh somewhere far away from the memories that would never truly fade. And as they drove out of town, past the empty lots and quiet streets, they carried with them the hope that their nightmare was finally behind them. But the town would never forget, and somewhere, perhaps, another set of eyes watched from the shadows, waiting for their own secrets to stay buried just a little longer. The days after Thomas Green's arrest brought a strange stillness to Willow Creek. For the first time in years, the town could breathe, though the air still felt heavy with everything that had come to light. People tried to return to their routines, but nothing felt quite the same. The discovery of that second hidden room beneath the Johnson house had left a mark that wouldn't fade easily. It reminded everyone that evil had lived quietly among them, hidden behind walls and beneath floors, unnoticed and unchecked for far too long. Sheriff Cole made it his mission to see that nothing like this ever happened again. He worked with state investigators and specialists to examine every house linked to Thomas Green. Hidden spaces were uncovered in a few, though none had helped people like the Johnsons. Still, the findings rattled everyone, a reminder of how much had gone unseen. Thomas faced trial, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. His confession, the blueprints, the journals, and the physical proof from the houses left no doubt. The court found him guilty on every charge, and he was sentenced to life without parole. For the families who had lost loved ones or lived through terror because of him, there was some comfort in knowing he would never harm anyone again. But even in his final moments in court, Thomas showed no remorse. His gaze remained distant, as if his mind was elsewhere, still lost in the twisted world he had created. Sheriff Cole watched him closely, wondering if Thomas had carried other secrets to his cell, things they might never uncover. For the Johnson family, the road to healing was long and difficult. Harold and Evelyn decided that staying in Willow Creek would be too painful. They packed what little they had and moved to another state, somewhere quiet where they could start over. The children needed stability and peace, something Willow Creek couldn't offer anymore. Anthony, Monica, and Sam each had their own ways of coping. Anthony began writing about his experiences, turning his pain into stories that helped him process what had happened. Monica found solace in art, using paint and sketching to express what words couldn't. Sam, though still deeply attached to his parents, slowly began to open up, finding small bits of joy in simple things like playing outside or reading books. They were determined not to let those lost years define the rest of their lives. The house on Willow Creek Lane was torn down after the final investigation was completed. The lot where it once stood became an empty field, grass growing where walls once hid terrible secrets. The town chose not to rebuild there. Instead, they planted a small garden, a quiet space where people could come to reflect, to remember those who had been lost, and to remind themselves of the strength it took to survive. It wasn't much, but it was a symbol of moving forward, of choosing light over darkness. Carla Jennings, whose dedication to the case had helped push the truth into the open, continued her work as a journalist. But the events in Willow Creek changed her, too. She became an advocate for better safety measures in housing and for more thorough inspections of older properties. Her articles helped raise awareness about how homes can hide dangers, both physical and human-made. People across the country read her reports, and some even uncovered hidden spaces in their own homes, left behind by previous owners. Carla felt a sense of purpose in knowing that what happened in Willow Creek might help prevent future tragedies. Sheriff Cole stayed in office, though he sometimes wondered if he should have done more, acted sooner, seen the signs that had been right in front of him. But the town stood by him. They knew he had given everything to bring the truth to light and protect his community. Under his watch, Willow Creek introduced new policies, background checks for contractors, stricter building inspections, and programs to support families who felt unsafe or uncertain about their homes. These steps didn't erase the past, but they gave people hope for a safer future. As time passed, the story of the Johnson family became one that people spoke of less often, though it was never truly forgotten. It became a reminder of how quickly ordinary life can be shattered, and how deeply resilience runs in those who face the unthinkable. The Johnsons' courage in surviving, the town's determination to uncover the truth, and the strength of those who stood together through the fear all became part of Willow Creek's history. People learned to look out for one another more, to ask questions, and to listen when something felt wrong. The final twist, the discovery of the second hidden room, remained a point of reflection. It was a reminder that no matter how much people believe they know about the world around them, there can always be layers unseen, secrets waiting beneath the surface. But it also showed that even the darkest truths can come to light when people refuse to look away. In the end, the Johnsons' story wasn't just about loss or fear. It was about survival, about community, and about the power of never giving up on finding the truth. Willow Creek moved forward, changed but stronger, carrying the lessons of the past as a guide for the future. And though the scars would always be there, the town knew that they had faced the darkness and found their way through. The garden that grew where the Johnson house once stood became a quiet place of hope, a promise that light can return even after the longest night.